Welcome to the Wellfuel Podcast, your spot for everything gut health, detox, hormones, a healthy home, mold, and everything in between. I'm your host, Isabel Smith. I'm an integrative and functional registered dietitian and the founder of Isabel Smith Nutrition. Welcome to the Wellfuel Podcast, your spot for everything gut health, detox, hormones, a healthy home, mold, and everything in between. I'm your host, Isabel Smith. I'm an integrative and functional registered dietitian and the founder of Isabel Smith Nutrition. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Wellfuel Podcast. I'm Isabel, and I'm your host. And today I have a really special friend on here, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation. Carrie Axelrod, who's a fellow dietitian. And Carrie and I have been friends for a number of years. And who's Carrie, though? Carrie's a functional medicine nutritionist in private practice. She helps clients eliminate their constipation, loose stools, fatigue, and migraines, and better manage their anxiety naturally without cutting out 40 different foods, using a combination of science-backed methods and nervous system support. Carrie, I'm so happy to have you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
You and I've been trying to get you on here for a while, and I'm poke, because you and I have been talking so much about our own personal stuff, throughout a lot of our own journeys, right? I think I threw a lot of my own stuff at you at some point and was like, help. And then I think at times you've called me and been like, help. And so I was like, maybe we should come on here and talk about this, because I think often people view you and I and go oh, they have their own stuff going on, but it's so much easier for them because they're experts and blah, blah, blah. By the way, it's not, right? I mean, you and I are humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're humans. So, first of all, will you tell everybody a little bit about what you do and the work you spend your days in?
Yeah. So in my private practice, I really focus on a combination of gut health support and anxiety and nervous system support, and where there's a lot of overlap between the two. So a lot of the clients that I work with are dealing with GI issues as well as anxiety.
And so as somebody who works with these types of folks, when we find ourselves in some of these scenarios, what's that been like for you, and whatever you want to share about your own journey, love the audience to know a little bit more about what's going on for you.
Yeah, of course. So I think there's, most anyone that's been dealing with ongoing GI issues, anxiety, just health issues, there's been a number of iterations of symptoms and sort of fluctuations in sort of different things that I've been dealing with. And so I'll just share that, I sort of got into this work like most people, dealing with my own sort of health journey, and that my first career was in presidential politics, which I'm sure Isabel. Yeah. So my first career was in presidential politics. And at that time, I knew nothing about health or nutrition or functional medicine. And this kind of work was the furthest thing from my priority list. I went to school undergrad in DC, and like most people in DC, you kind of get to know the right people. If you have some talent, your career can kind of take off quickly at a young age. And I found myself on the presidential campaign trail, sort of traveling around the country from city to city and working in presidential communications specifically. And so just through that lifestyle and the stress and kind of the grueling pace, I started to develop a lot of symptoms. So I had anxiety, extreme fatigue, debilitating panic attacks, and GI issues. And at that time, an undiagnosed autoimmune thyroid condition. And just to make a long story short, I was going to the doctors, and I was really unhappy with the answers that I was getting. I was sort of put on SSRIs, Xanax, and sort of given experimental medications. And there's nothing wrong with those medications. But for me and a lot of the clients that I work with, there was just this deep inner knowing that that's not it. That's not the story for me, that there's something else contributing to my issues and my symptoms. And so I consider myself a pretty stubborn person, and for better or worse. And I basically just said one day, I was really frustrated. And I said, well, if someone else can't figure this out for me, I'm going to figure it out. And, fast forward a decade later, and a decade of training and academic training, here we are in private practice, helping others uncover their symptoms. So that's how this all started for me.
I didn't actually know the whole presidential campaign piece. I knew the communications piece.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize it was that type of communication. So like also the stress, right?
Yeah.
And that, do you think the stress kicked off some of this stuff? Do you have, looking back, do you have any insight? And we don't always, but like, I wonder, like, was there any insight for you of like where this might have come from? I guess now maybe you have more answers than you do at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I sort of look back and I think about that, like, no one asked me about my sleep at the
Yeah.
time, which was atrocious. I was falling asleep with my phone on my pillow and my laptop on my chest, literally
God.
working until I fell asleep. No one was asking me about my diet. I literally went to Starbucks every single morning on my way to work, and that was my breakfast. I was never home, and so my dinner was takeout every single day. And to
Yeah.
me, it's like that's the confluence of events, and then you put in this, incredibly full stress bucket. And now to me, it makes complete sense of why my body was just like, no, like we actually can't do this any longer.
Yeah, it's amazing, I think, as humans, when we're like, ignore, 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 ignore. And then you hit a point and you're like, well, damn it, I can't ignore this anymore.
Yeah.
And if I could have paid attention sooner, well, gee, maybe things would have been a little different. And hindsight is always 2020, right? And we look back and we go, why didn't I sooner? But at some point you decided you needed to do something about it.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if I exactly decided, again, the stubbornness, my body decided that like I couldn't ignore it any longer. If I'm being super honest, I don't know if I kind of intellectually decided.
was the beginning of your own like healing treatment? Do you remember what you started with? Like, how did you start? Like, what was the first thing you worked on?
Yeah. So, and I think just like to kind of paint a picture, it's like I didn't know the things to work on because no one told me. And I think
Yeah.
that that's like the most frustrating part, for a lot of clients that I work with. And I think back, this was like 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago at this point, it said the frustrating part, it's like, I didn't know because I wasn't educated. Didn't have the education that I have now. And that was so frustrating. It's like, why couldn't someone just help me with my sleep? Or why couldn't someone just tell me that like I needed to take a day off? Like, like I never got that. And I think that that's so frustrating. And so the first thing I really started with was nutrition, because at that time, kind of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition was the only thing that was like around and sort of available for, kind of widely, or not even widely, but I think that that was like the most well-known training, kind of health coaching. Health coaching was really kind of in its beginning stages. And I had someone that I knew who was like a yoga teacher in DC who had done IIN. And I was like, great, this just seems like something that could help me. And I really had no clue what I was getting into. So that's really where I started with like the nutrition and sort of some holistic lifestyle practices.
And then from there, I'm sure like as you learned more and as you got into it, you were like, oh my gosh, there's like all these things I like can do now, know how to, I'm thinking about, have been pointed out to me. And then like, I feel like once the snowball rolls, it rolls, right? Is that sort of how it went for you?
Yeah, for sure. From like a personal perspective and then a professional perspective, that I was like, okay, I do need to go back to school. And that's where I went back to school to become a dietitian as well. Cause I was like, I really want to know the nitty gritty science behind what's happening.
Yeah, it was funny when you and I first met. You and I first met when I was in Boston for one of my early skin surgeries, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. Which was like very much like the starting point for me of all of this stuff, because I was forced to. But I remember thinking to myself, gosh, she knows a lot of things for somebody who's not a dietitian, which is a funny haha, because I'm sure you and I meet people all the time who are not like truly like what we would consider like medically expert trained, yet they happen to know more than most medically trained experts that we come across.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like a really But I was like, I remember being so impressed by the fact that like you knew more than most dietitians knew, but you wanted the credentials
Mhm.
so much. And I'm so happy that you've decided to stick it out and you have the credentials. I hope that that's satisfying for you now to have them, right? You're like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, the thing that's nice, I think, and we could have a whole separate side conversation about like
Mhm.
having the R&D is that like we
Yeah.
can sign up for different, we can show our medical license and whatever. But the point is that, I think, looking back on it, for most of us, there's like some, for you, it was like your journey personally prompted your professional journey. So if I'm not wrong, the whole time you've been doing this professionally, you've also been working on your own personal journey. Is
Yeah.
that right?
The entire time.
I look
Yeah.
forward for you to a time where you're not working on your personal journey and you can
Yeah.
just do your professional stuff. That's
Yeah.
going to feel really good for you.
Yeah.
When you get there, because you're going to be like, oh, I don't have this like personal thing that's so distracting, because it is so distracting to do on top of this professional thing.
Yeah.
So how have you navigated doing your working on your personal journey while also being in this like professional growth? Because you have had your own business while also working on your dietitian credentials, license, yada yada. So
Yeah.
you've had like a lot of things going on altogether.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's been, like I said in the beginning, that there's been different iterations, and I'd be curious kind of your take on this. And, different years I've had different ebbs and flows of my own kind of personal health
Yeah.
journey. So at certain times they've been in the forefront, and then other times it really hasn't been.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been like 10 years of this like intensity around my own health at all. I would say that probably like the last year has been pretty intense with my own health, unfortunately. And um, it's and I'm happy to share details, but I think it's been like the greatest teacher.
Yeah.
And um, you know, I'm like a month into feeling better, so I can say this now. And so I want to be really sensitive to anyone listening who's like in the thick of it, because sometimes it can just be like,
Yeah.
whatever, when you hear that. But I'm so grateful to have been in the thick of it for the last year, because it's exposed some weaknesses in my life that I really needed to like clean up outside of health that could be contributing to me sort of being back in like a cycle of, my immune system being so run down that it was like susceptible to, you
Yeah.
know, mycotoxins again, tick-borne illness. And so I'm so grateful for that experience. And it's been, and continues to be one of my biggest teachers.
Yeah. No, I could say the same thing. I mean, I said to a client yesterday, I literally heard and saw myself on Zoom saying to a client, my experience with this tick-borne stuff and the Lyme and the mold and all the rest of it is actually my greatest gift. It has been the greatest gift that I could have received. And like, I'm like, wow, what an evolved human I am to be sitting here saying this, right? But like through the ups and downs of it, like my business and my ability to help people and my knowledge and my connections and my everything has just exploded. And I started my business feeling awesome. Honestly, I started my business in 2014. She's 10 this year, actually. And
Congratulations.
thank you. For the first 5 years, I felt awesome. I honestly felt awesome. And as I neared, I guess for the first 4 years, maybe 3 years, maybe it was 3 years, because I think at some point I remember feeling scared that like I knew something was wrong. I was really trying to expand things. I thought I was working the most I'd ever worked. I actually work more now than I did then. That's a whole separate conversation, but and being like, how am I ever going to sustain this? I was on ADD meds and I was wrapped around their finger, and I was terrified that if I stopped, everything was going to come crashing down and that I wouldn't be able to sustain my growth and that blah, 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 all these stories we make up in our heads. And so, well, I was forced to slow down and which actually has allowed me to speed up a lot, and more than I ever could have planned on. I now have like a team of 8 and I'm like, working really hard to like be a good leader and all of that. And I couldn't figure out how to keep one person 4 years ago. So, all of this stuff. But, it's very overwhelming. It has been for me again in seasons, right? Where when I'm like going through it and going through these treatments, you go from feeling moderately unwell to really unwell. And that can be really hard to wrap your head around because when you started the treatment, you didn't feel as crummy. And then when you're in it, you have to go through it because if you don't, the beast is going to catch up with you at some point. But do I have to do it now or could I do it later? Or gosh, how am I going to see all these people and I just can't talk to another person or think about another thing? It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And I know you know that personally.
Yeah. And I think that that's like a great point. And there is this fine line, and we've talked about this too, is like when knowing that an uptick in symptoms is normal for the course of treatment, and the line where, okay, there's actually more pieces of the puzzle that we don't have, and how
Yeah.
I'm reacting is not normal.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really where a skilled practitioner can come in, which is why I never recommend, even for you and I treating ourselves, because it's never great. It's hard to kind of know that line for yourself, but there is a fine line between um, a detox reaction, symptoms increasing in treatment, and a reaction that's not normal that needs to be addressed. And that was certainly my story over the last year for sure.
Well, and it's also like, right, as you and I were talking about offline, it's like, right, what is actually part of the getting better process, right? Which is unfortunately discomfort. And I'm usually on the other end of the Zoom camera cheering when somebody has a reaction because I'm like, bingo, we got it. Right.
Mhm.
This thing we haven't been able to identify or you hadn't been able to identify as the problem, generally speaking, where there's no noise, there's no problems, generally
Yeah.
speaking. And when we find an area, especially in somebody who's been able to sail through this and sail through that, but like hasn't gotten better and continues to poop 6-foot worms and I give them something and they're herxing like crazy, I'm like, amen. We figured
Yeah.
out. We
Yeah.
solved the blind spot. But I think for somebody who's sitting in it, and you and I know that that's normal, right? And often a great thing, right? We temper how much we kill our clients, right? And how not kill our clients, but how much we flatten our clients and how difficult it is for them. But often we're looking for noise because we want to understand where the problems are. But I
Yeah.
think for clients, it's really challenging because they're like, this isn't working. I feel worse than I did before. And so my job is always like being like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Some noise is good, too much is not good, but no noise is not what I want either because that means that that's not where the problem lies.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. And I think for anyone listening that's not a practitioner, I also think that there's a kind of deep intuitive knowing within your own body of knowing when something is right and it's just uncomfortable and you kind of need to stick with it, and kind of deeply intuitive knowingly know that like there's something else to this picture that I haven't necessarily addressed yet. And that's, I just can't reiterate, that's why it's so important to be working with a skilled practitioner, so that you don't end up in the position where, and I've certainly been there multiple times where I'm like, there's something else going on here and it's not right and it's not being addressed. And, both times deeply listening to that intuition, once, 11 years ago, and once like in the last year, has radically changed my health, both times for the better.
Yeah, I mean, and poor Paul gets talked about a lot on here, but I can speak to his experience and when you live with somebody or when you're with somebody a lot, right? We kind of as practitioners, we like try not to treat them.
Yeah.
Right. I pulled somebody else in on him, but then I was kind of like the day-to-day watchman, right? And so I'm like, is this getting better? No, right. So he started with this mold treatment and I'm like, 5 months later, I'm like, I can't push him as hard as I want to because he just can't tolerate it and he's not getting better like he should be getting better. and he's still pretty heavy for where he should be. And his skin is really red and he's having a lot of issues in this, that, and the other direction. And I'm just like, there's something missing here. Right. So naturally I sent him to Mary Beth. And you know, sure thing. He, gets like positive this, that, and the other thing on the Western blot Lyme test that came back, right? On a LabCorp test. He did an IGeneX. Actually, no, he didn't even do an IGeneX. He did only LabCorp, and he got like the Moyamoto, the Japanese tick and like some other stuff. And so he's been on antibiotics for a month, and I've never seen such an improvement in a human. Right. And that's a perfect example. I will have him on here. I've always threatened it, but he'd love to come on here. And so we just have to organize it. But it's an example of like, okay, like he should have been getting better, but he like wasn't getting better. I think that this is like very much your story too. Like I should be getting better, but I'm just like not. And I'm like sliding around in the mud and maybe I'm getting worse. So where do I go next?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, Paul's story is very, very similar to mine. It's like my exact story. And that I was exposed to mycotoxins for the second time. And I knew that I was being exposed to mycotoxins less in May 2023, June 2023, so about a year ago. And I started mycotoxin treatment last October, and I knew I help clients through mycotoxin detox. It comes with the territory of gut and anxiety, right? Because mycotoxins affect the nervous system and affects GI. And so I was, working with another practitioner, and I'm like, I knew my labs. Like, I'm like, I've seen worse. Like, there's not so much here that I'm like so scared. Right. So I started mycotoxin treatment, the end of fall and early winter. And I think I remember talking to you in February, and I'm like, there's something like deeply wrong here. Like really, like I'm not getting better and I'm getting so much worse. And it doesn't make sense based on my treatment and my labs. And I think I said to you, I'm like, I think this is tick-borne. And
I was
that
like,
has
yes, ma'am.
And that's kind of, that sort of, it took me a while to find the right practitioner and, to get an appointment, but I am coming up on 1 month, ending 1 month of double antibiotic therapy. And I feel, I would say 900% better.
It's amazing, right? Yeah. And you and I talked a lot about like our personal perspectives on antibiotics and all the things we learn, and throwing out the intellectual knowledge of antibiotics are bad. They're bad for your gut, la, la, la. But like, however, when they're used right and they're used properly and you protect the gut and you protect the system, they're actually pretty damn magical. And that's been a perspective shift for me. I'm sure it has been for you too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think some of the reasons why antibiotics have been so successful for me is, the work I've done with my gut before, and then I do regular stool testing on my gut. So, really kind of have known in a really targeted way what I needed to do to protect my gut and ensure, good gut health. And then really, protecting my gut during antibiotic treatment. And then certainly that will happen post. And I think people really get into a lot of trouble with long-term antibiotic use when there's not enough done to protect the gut, both during and after treatment.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the whole picture, right? Is like the protection of it. Mm-hmm. And I think most practitioners and people out there are just taking an antibiotic without a probiotic or without enough probiotics or in the wrong time frame, or their doctor is telling them probiotics don't get anybody anywhere. And you and I are slamming our head against the wall at that point. And the reality is, when done properly, if the antibiotics are properly used, right, I am a lot more afraid personally of not getting rid of my tick-borne infection because of the long-term ramifications. than I am of really, I take 8 probiotics a day. I've been very, very candid about that, 4 different types twice a day. Popping them all day long. My gut's very happy. And it has been throughout the whole process. And Paul, who has more, I don't really have gut issues. Paul has had a lot of gut issues for a while. He's tolerating beautifully. And I just have him on he's taking 6 probiotics a day, not 8, but 6. He's doing great and not having any trouble with his gut. And, so there is hope for people who need to do these things. Again, if you do it with the right person and have the right support and have the right, brains on board, it's not going to be the end of the world. And in fact, may actually move the needle like Kerri's talking about.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it more beautifully. And I think, I think probiotics are really important in antibiotic treatment, but like the role of fiber and needing to feed the bacteria that's there, and kind of really doing that in an important way, and in which, there are different strains of fiber that feed different strains of bacteria. So I agree. I think when done with protecting, and I'll just step back. And if you asked me like 4 months ago if I'd be on a podcast talking about like how beneficial antibiotics could be, no, I would have laughed at you. And I also, I think it is important to note that, we can talk about the benefits of antibiotics, especially when it comes to tick-borne disease, and, how much better I feel. And also, it can also be true that antibiotics are overprescribed and often prescribed for things that they don't actually treat, and that there can be, detrimental changes to the microbiome, and that both of those realities and truths can exist at the same time. And I just think it's important to acknowledge.
No, and I'm with you. And I think most of the time antibiotics are poorly used, over frequently used.
Yeah.
And even in the realm of Lyme, are improperly prescribed. And I see a lot of really stupid use. Having played in this playground myself personally and professionally for quite some time, I know right off the bat when somebody was given something they shouldn't have been given. And I will lovingly say, you might want to go back to that practitioner of yours, or you might want to consider a new one. Here's some recommendations, because it can be really dangerous. And I think that there is so much divide in this like Lyme world about what's right and what's wrong, because I think there is a lot of really bad medicine being practiced, not just in this world, but I think across the board, right? Particularly when it comes to antibiotic use. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it comes back to, I kind of have 2 points in that. I think it is important for us to have this conversation about, like, as practitioners who practice in the functional medicine space and love supplements and love diet and love lifestyle as a true root cause approach. And that, like, because I often have clients that are so reluctant to take medicine because they really do want to really focus on that root cause approach, which I applaud. And I think it's really important. But the fact that, here to say that there is a time and a place where, medicine can be used appropriately and used correctly, and, make life-changing strides that, like, personally, I don't know if I'd be able to see without it. And then I think your point also goes back to, like, I know it can be scary, and I know it can be kind of difficult and challenging sometimes to find the right practitioner, but like, it's going to save you years and years and years of trial and error to just work with someone that, is an expert in their field and has seen hundreds of cases similar to yours.
Totally. And like, for both Kerri and you and I are both in the camp of, or have been long time, probably, tick-borne infected people. So, I started, and I have a BART sitting on my desk here. Like, I also use combo herbs, right? And I have the whole time. And the reason that I wasn't able to simply use them was because I was like circling the drain. I wasn't getting better. So what was happening is I was just creating a lot of herxing, but I wasn't actually getting at, all of the bacteria. And so my practitioner, who's been on here, Mary Beth, was like, look, you're welcome to use the herbs. As long as you're actually getting somewhere and you're not just creating a big splash. And at some point I looked at myself and I said, I'm just creating splash. So I use the herbs now to support these bugs. I do that with our clients as well. I have herbal tinctures that I like to use with clients who don't have primary tick infections as the root cause of their problems. They need antibiotic treatment or something else, or dapsone or whatever it is. So I send them on to somebody like Mary Beth or other people because I have a list of those. But for people who have past infections, who, might do well with certain like herbal support and like immune support, all of that, that's all fair game, but we're not treating primary tick infections, right? We're just
Yeah.
supporting the body and the whole picture. That's a very, very different situation from people who've had, I think I've had tick-borne issues most of my life, to be honest. That was masked as other things. And I think my body you would probably say the same thing. It was tolerant. And then suddenly you and I both hit a wall and that was that. And so, I think, I love the fact that you acknowledge that you were like 4 months ago, I would not have come on here and said this to you, because I remember when I poked you about this, I was like, ooh, girlfriend's not ready yet. And then one day you were like, okay, I can come on and we can chat about it. The perspective shift is, I think, when you're in it and you are able to see improvement from something that, you like seriously question. There are major risks associated with all these things, right? Especially this antibiotic use and all that other stuff when used inappropriately. But it's amazing to feel like the needle is moving. And this could be true for somebody using herbs for SIBO or H. pylori treatment or whatever it is that's your root cause, which can be achieved easily without having to go through what Kerri and I have been through, right? But whatever your root cause is, finding somebody, as Kerri has said, to help with getting you to the root cause, moving the needle in a way that's meaningful. That's really what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some things that you have found helpful to keep yourself going through this process? Because it's this amazing human who works with me sent me this incredible Instagram post, which was like this like person like DJing, being like what they do every day to like hype themselves up to like get through the day. And she literally was like, this is you. And I was like, it is. It's a process, especially when you don't feel well.
Yeah. I think we're both a fan of cold plunging.
Mm-hmm.
And I think cold plunging has some nuances there that are important, especially for women. That's like, we don't need to go to like 30-degree temperatures, and, it doesn't need to be for 5 or 6 minutes. But I think responsible cold plunging always sort of moves the needle for me, especially with like pretty extreme fatigue, which is something I was dealing with pretty significantly. Knowing when to pull back on exercise, knowing when to pull back on, strength training, even though I'm a huge proponent of strength training. And, knowing when it's appropriate to kind of, lean more into walking, or, when your body needs to be kind of pushed. So that's been, kind of intermittently just walking or strength training. Sauna's been really helpful for me. I know sometimes when someone's like too in it, sauna can really exacerbate symptoms, but from a detox perspective, my body does really, really well with sauna. Again, not for 45-minute sessions and not at extreme temperatures, shorter, like 20-minute sessions at appropriate temperatures is always really therapeutic for me. So I would say and honestly, like jumping in the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
so therapeutic. In the winter it was in the morning, and now it's, right around sunset has been so incredibly healing for my nervous system, in sort of so many ways.
I love those. And what I love about them as dietitians is none of those are actually really food related, which thank you, because like, look, you and I could talk about vegetables and juicing, but I really do think it's about like, it's nervous system. Like if your nervous system is happy, you'll move through treatment so much faster. And a lot of the things you brought up were like definitely nervous system. I so agree with you that less exercise has been more, and that is the greatest education I've had to like personally learn,
Mm-hmm.
because when you feel like swollen and heavy and blah, you're like, if I exercise, I'll feel better, because in a body that doesn't have inflammation, at some point that might have been true. But when you do that on top of this inflammatory process, friends, you will end up larger, more heavy, more swollen, more uncomfortable. I still, to this day, 6 years in, skip the exercise on days that I feel that way. And I'm always, at the end of the day, I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, I feel so much better. And I'm like, can't you just learn already? Right. That like, this is what you actually should be doing. That piece is really remarkable.
Yeah.
Quick tips on cold plunge. What do you like to start temperature wise at? What do you suggest for somebody who's a newbie?
55, like
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really gentle.
Yeah.
There's a cold plunge place here. I'm in Florida right now. And it's like the warmest is like 45. And I'm like, no, like it's too cold. It's too cold. And so, my body's like happiest at the 55, and like 1 to 2 minutes max. And what I like to do from a cold plunge perspective is like, especially if I'm like have taken a break and I'm just getting back into it, it's like a minute in the cold and then hopping into a hot shower. A minute in the cold, hopping into a hot shower. So it's just not this continuous stimulus to the adrenals, the nervous system, et cetera, which, if you're in the beginning stages of any type of treatment, adrenal repair, mold, like gut, Lyme, anything, if we're tipping the adrenals and the nervous system too much, it's going to, backfire.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I started at 75 degrees. So like whatever, I would like sit there and I'd be like, and Paul would come along with the freaking thermometer and stick it in and be like, here, it's 75 degrees. And I'd be like, but you start where you need to start.
Yeah.
The point always is not to make your nervous system freak out. You might have 10 to 15 seconds of like needing to breathe through it, but it shouldn't make things worse. You should actually be able to get this, like my favorite is like that like calm that comes over and you just have this like feeling where like everything's calming down. That's my favorite part of the cold plunge. I mean, you and I should like open a cold plunge franchise because you and I are such believers in it. Maybe we should do that actually.
Yeah. I mean, I always know personally that I've tipped my adrenals and my nervous system too far with the cold plunge when I feel exhausted in the afternoon after. That's always my sign that I've gone too long, too cold.
Yeah. No, I think less is more. And I think honestly, like to put a bow on this, less is more, period.
Yeah.
End of story. Right. So it's like less sauna, less castor oil pack, less cold plunge.
Yeah.
Just like I say to my clients, and I'm sure you'd agree, like, I want you to either feel better or like we did nothing. Right. So like not worse, not like your system is aggravated, but like neutral or better is the goal. Mm-hmm. And I think so often when we're healing, we're like, it should feel this way or that way. Like, no, it should be like neutral or better. And I think because if we do too much, we can't ever get where we want to be.
Yeah, I agree.
So where can people find you? How can people follow you? Because you have a wonderful Instagram page and lots going on there.
Oh, amazing. So I'm at Carrie Axelrod on Instagram. Just my first name, Kerri, Axelrod, my last name. And that is my website as well.
Beautiful. Well, thanks friends for joining us for this, I'll call it fireside chat of sorts. Go follow Kerri because she's awesome. And we'll see you back right here next time on the Wellfuel Podcast.
Thanks.
As always, thanks so much for listening to the Wellfuel Podcast. We're so happy to have you. To make sure you don't miss a beat, please subscribe either on Apple or Spotify because we have episodes dropping once or more a week with tons of great content. If you want to make sure that you're up to date on everything we're doing in the business with our clients and new offers and all the things, make sure that you check us out at Isabel Smith Nutrition on Instagram and isabelsmithnutrition.com. See you guys soon. As always, thanks so much for listening to the Wellfuel Podcast. We're so happy to have you. To make sure you don't miss a beat, please subscribe either on Apple or Spotify because we have episodes dropping once or more a week with tons of great content. If you want to make sure that you're up to date on everything we're doing in the business with our clients and new offers and all the things, make sure that you check us out at Isabel Smith Nutrition on Instagram and isabelsmithnutrition.com. See you guys soon.